I'd like to call on Assistant CEO Sharika Fields, who, in addition to being an excellent speaker, also has done a good job of putting together the administration's budget, and I'll ask that she present it at this time.
And she's an accomplished dancer too.
Yes, she is.
Do y'all have the books to pass out? When are y'all gonna pass the books out?
Sent them up.
We've submitted them to the council on October 1st.
Y'all got them up there?
Yeah.
And I just had to pick mine up.
Makes sense.
Nobody has them yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was Ron. I'm the only one that picked this up.
Okay.
Ron, yeah, man.
Okay, there it is. All right, Mr. Chairman and members of the council, I want to start with this budget overview to talk about some of the budget assumptions that were made going into this process. Overall, the 2014 budget is about 2% more than the 2013 budget, and this is mainly due to increases in the debt service fund, the enterprise fund. It includes a transfer to the reserve fund, and the capital budget's increases are mainly due to increases in the airport improvements. And this is just outlining the dollar amounts for each of those funds. Again, mainly increases to the enterprise funds and the debt service funds, which I will go into those summaries shortly. This chart shows general fund revenues since 2010, and the numbers do not include prior year fund balances, and they don't include some revenues that came in 2010 and 2012 that were for certificates of indebtedness for equipment purchases. And just to look at this trend and to see where we are for the 2013 forecast, we are assuming that sales taxes will end about the same as 2012 at $113 million. And then also, although we budgeted for the UPL reimbursements to be about $1 million based upon finance, the draws that we've received so far, there could be a couple of $100,000 more that may come in from those revenues that may improve where we are at the end of this year. And for 2014 budget assumptions, we're assuming very conservative projections, taking sales taxes to be about 1% more than where it was at 2012. It also includes a transfer of $4.56 million from the minor arterial capital project. As of right now, $5.4 million has been encumbered for phase 1 streets projects. So that would make the total of general fund revenue as presented to be $208 million. Also included is $1.5 million for transfer from the streets special revenue fund, which would be maintained as the current budget year. And it includes increases for EMS due to the EMS rate increase, and also increases from UPL reimbursements. Due to the elimination of the Bossier City Solid Waste Collection, this is $1.3 million that are not reflected in the 2014 budget. There's also reductions in oil and gas royalties, and there's a 3.5% reduced amount from the Riverfront Fund into the general fund. 2013 budget included spending of $208 million, and the 2014 budget projects a 1% decrease from that. And it includes reserves that are about 3% of total spending. What's included in the budget is a 5% healthcare increase and 2% increases for our public safety for longevity, which totals about $1 million. It maintains fire and police pension deficit at the 2013 level. And also it has reductions from the overtime and fuel expenses and other expenses related to the Bossier Solid Waste Collection, and overall departmental appropriation reductions and about $2 million in notes payable that is not included in the 14 budget that will be paid off in this year. This budget was approached to continue reductions from 2013. Each of the departments were guided and requested to identify their core missions and functions and to do a detailed cost analysis to find where each department could reduce its appropriations by about 5%. Each of the departments have those cost analyses, and they will be able to present those details during the individual budget review sessions to discuss what impact those would have. The general fund targets were set to restore operating reserves, and also with the commitment to grow them annually into future years without eliminating people or without reducing services. However, what was found is that additional reductions to the budget would pose some risk to either people or to current services or operations. This chart that's outlined at the bottom, it shows that if we take out the transfer from the minor arterial program that is currently factored in, reserves at the current general fund spending level would be $1.4 million, which is about 0.7% of spending. So this top row identifies reserves as a percent of general fund spending. So if we look out toward the right, if we go more toward a 2011 level of reserves of $10 million, then that would be 5% of general fund spending, which would require an additional $8.8 million in reductions to the budget compared to what was presented currently. So this shows just a picture of what would be required in additional cuts if we wanted to boost reserves without the assistance of the minor arterial program funds.
One question, since you started with 5%, is that 5% that you've got in bullet number 3 above that 10 million, or is it above and beyond that 10 million?
The 5% that's within the bullet points, if the departments had reached that target, then the reserves number would be closer to about 10 million.
Okay, and so that current 1% for 2014 is the 2 million number, right?
Currently, it would be the 0.7%. And the 0.7% is the reserves as a percentage of the expenditures for 2014. So without the minor arterial transfer, reserves would be at 1.4 million.
So that's not really current, that's 2014 projection.
2014 projection.
Okay, because I was tying into that 2014 1% up of
Right. No, that would be at
Okay.
the end of 14.
But wouldn't that current is referring to spending patterns. So if there's not a reduction in the departmental spending patterns, that's what the estimate is.
Well, actually,
That's not what he's saying.
Oh, I thought.
Actually, Mr. Everson, what that represents is, what we try to do with the budget approach is focus on operating reserve, because that's been a huge topic of discussion. Based on the 2014 budget that we're submitting, if you don't do the transfer from minor arterial, then we net out, based on these very conservative revenue projections as well as the expenditures, about 1.4, 1.5 million, which represents only a 7.7% reserve. Mm-hmm. The rest of that chart is to show that if we wanted to reach a higher level of reserve, the middle line in green is the absolute dollar value. The number below that is how much additional cuts would have to happen, minus the minor arterial, and in addition to what's already been cut out of the budget.
So that's in addition to the 5% that each department head has already submitted.
No, and let me correct you, the 5% exercise was to identify the cost centers, because not every department did 5%, some have more, some have less, when it all nets out, but that was the beginning target for the exercise.
Okay.
That's totally unrelated to the bottom part. Once all the cuts have been placed in and we've submitted the budget, that's when this chart kicks in, and it shows that the 2014 budget as presented, based on all the reductions and cuts that have been done, based on the conservative revenue projections, it would net us out at about 1.5 million at the end of 2014, assuming revenue went the way we're projecting it and expenditures went the way we're projecting it. Now, we think and we believe revenue is already trending better, but obviously for budgetary purposes, we're taking the most conservative approach we can.
And that's the best way.
Yes, sir. So the main thing here was to show the impact. If we don't transfer the minor arterial money over there, then we're looking at having to do these additional cuts in order to meet one of those reserve targets.
Right. And let me just ask this in a little bit different way, taking back from another slide. Globally, we're projecting a sales increase of 1% for next year?
A little less than 1%.
Okay.
Over 2012.
No, over 2013.
Right.
Okay.
2013, we're projecting 113, we're projecting 114 for
But
2014.
2012 and 13 or
1%
something.
over 13.
Okay, so we got a 1% increase there, right? I know that's only 60-some% of the total, but, and then we've got a overall budget expenditure proposal of reducing it by 1%. So just in those two in isolation, we have a net gain of 2%, right?
In terms of,
In terms of revenues, up 1%. And
And
expenditures
Gotcha,
down
okay.
So it's a net 2. Now, and I'm guessing one of the reasons is that our total figure, when we talk revenues, we're only talking sales tax revenues. I recognize that, which is only 60% of our total revenues. I also, but you would think, looking at this chart, that our net gain would be better than 0.7%.
in terms of reserve, because that's the reserve number.
Sure,
Right.
unless we had a deficit in our reserve for 2013.
And that's the
And
question
not-
I wanted to ask is,
I mean, I'm summing that all up because what that tells me when I see that is we got to have a negative balance to begin with for us to not have a greater than 0.7 next year.
Well, aren't we also sending over less from Riverfront
Yes,
this year?
But
yes.
3%.
Yeah, and there's a chart here also that shows the fund balance, where we're projecting it to be at the end of 2013. And the 0.7% that's showing here for current, it's actually expressing the reserve of 1.4 million as a percentage of total spending. So
Right, because-
the 1.4 million is 0.7% of the total spending number of 206 million.
For 2014. That's why it's hard to do kind of that direct correlation, because
And-
all the numbers have changed. The expenditure numbers changed, the revenue numbers changed, and when you take that percentage, that's why it ends up 0.7, because it's against the 2014 spending level, not the 2013 spending level.
And Mr. Sibley,
Yes, sir.
all of this is a projection,
Yes, sir.
and,
That makes sense.
you know, this might sound a little silly, but we still don't know what my friends in DC is gonna do.
Correct.
And you know, whether we realize it or not, that will have a trickle-down effect on what our economy will be here. Because if, I said my friends, but your friends too, if we continue to have this shutdown, I mean, this is gonna impact our economy, not only all over the United States, but all over the world. We've been kind of fortunate here in Shreveport. You know, we don't have a whole lot that will impact, but something like this is going to impact our economy. So all of this is a projection. And the other thing that if you can, we're looking at the reserve. I mean, could you kind of look at how this will impact our bonding power? Because I do know that the better our reserve is, the better bonding rates that we can get sometimes. So, would you, I mean, could you all get us some figures on that?
On how it
So-
would directly impact,
I'm sorry.
how it would directly impact a bond rating,
Wait a minute, say that again now.
how it would directly impact the bond rating.
Right. How our reserves would, you know, directly impact our bond rating. Let's say, if we had the 5%, if we had the 4%, if we had the 3%, if we had the 2% of whatever. Sam and I was discussing that earlier. I think when he wanted to trim off a little bit and put in the reserves, and also our bonding capacity would be greater. But
That's,
At that time, we really didn't have any figures on that. Is there any way you could get us some figures back on that?
we can try, Mr. Sean, that's really in the eyes of the graders, you know, in terms of how much they penalize you or not. But even in addition to that, just as a best practice for fiscal operations of the city, it's recommended that you have a reserve of a certain amount of time, just like at home, to cover expenditures. So we're trying to address it from the fiscal condition of the city also, so that our balance sheet looks well and we look as though we are prepared in the event we have an emergency. So it impacts the bond rating.
I understand, right, I understand that, but also, you know, when you talk to people out in the community, where they got these bad streets and all this other bad stuff, you start talking about, putting it in reserve and all this kind of stuff, they don't really understand what you're talking about. So, and I understand that this comes from the Raiders, but being in the financial world, I mean, it seems like y'all ought to be able to get us some information. You know, now this is, you know, I know you can't get us true information, but you can get us some projections. I mean, that's just like the sales tax. I mean, you can't really tell us what it's gonna be.
Right.
I mean, all this is projection.
Right.
So, you know, if we could get some figures, if you could, you know, call up some Raiders. I mean, you know, I mean, that's what y'all do.
We'll see what we can
You
do.
know, if y'all can't do it, I mean, you know, we can ask Art to do it. You know, but because we need to have some figures on what we need to put in reserve. You know, because when I talk to people and say, well, you know, we got 5% reserve, they say, Joe, I'm knocking my front end out of line on your reserve. So, you know, I at least need some figures that say, look, you know, we're going to do a bonding, and this is what we can save the city. Am I making any sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do this if we can. I don't want to break Ms. Fields' momentum up too bad. Let's let her go through her presentation. I'd ask each of us, as we have questions, to write them down,
Okay.
and then we can come
That's
back
good.
and do some questions and answer then, if that's all right.
Okay. I'll keep going. This is the general fund that I'm going to overview now. And again, it's 1% less of the 2013 budget. And here's a summary of available funds chart that I just mentioned. And it starts with the actual fund balance as of January 1, 2013, that came from the audit, which was $6.4 million. And the 2013 estimated revenues at $203 million. And total available for expenditures is $210, including the revenues plus the fund balance. 2013 estimated expenditures at $206 million, which we have talked about, and of course been working with the departments to maintain budgeted expenditures at 99%. And that leaves us with a fund balance that's estimated for this year end at $4 million. And then adding back the 2014 estimated revenues at $208 and the estimated expenditures at $206 million. And the 206 includes the reserves amount where we would end up being with the $6 million in reserves, which includes the transfer from the minor arterial project. And just a quick summary on each of the general fund departments, starting with the executive office, generated a 1% decrease from and all of these are compared to the 2013 budget. And legal has a 3% decrease, reducing some training and travel and supplies. Property standards has a decrease of 10%, which includes reductions to contractual services to offset that with a new grass crew to be able to assist with monitoring. And they have no transfer in other funds because their notes payables was all paid off in 2013.
Must be being picked up.
Human resources budget is essentially unchanged. Information technology is reduced by 2% due to a few vacant positions that have been unfunded, and then some reductions in materials and supplies. SPAR's budget is increased by 1%. They have fully funded utilities, which totals about $2.9 million of SPAR's budget, and some of the decreases that SPAR was able to generate was offset by the increase in healthcare expenditures of 5%. Finance Department decreases 4%. General Government decreases 1% from 2013, and this fund includes all of the transfers to other funds, including MPC, Sports Tran, Risk, Community Development, and Golf, and then also a few of the public agency appropriations. It's increased by $60,000 to fund for truancy and also for the Independent Stadium scoreboard replacement. The Police Department budget has no change from 2013, and the Police Department's budget includes $49 million in personnel line items, and this was also including the 2% longevity increase. In 2014, they will be funding 27 officers that were previously grant funded. There was significant reductions in notes payables and other appropriations, which was slightly offset by the healthcare increases and longevity increases. For the Fire Department, personnel line items total $45 million of this budget, and it is essentially unchanged from 2013. There's a slight increase that's factored in here for transfers that will be needed to match for the UPL participation, and then it's also offset by reductions in notes payables and other appropriation reductions. Engineering was overall increased by 8%, which is mainly due to funding for vegetation management. And Public Works is decreased by 4%, which includes decreases in expenses such as overtime and fuel for Bossier solid waste collection, and then also reductions in notes payable. And it includes the implementation of a bulk collection program. And the City Council's budget is found decreases 3%. And City Courts, the budget is increased by almost 10%. However, its expenditures do not exceed the revenues that are generated within this department. And City Marshal's budget is for personnel salaries only, and it's unchanged from 2013. The internal service funds, retained risk, the 2012 audit had a negative fund balance in retained risk, and it was reviewed about a couple of months ago on if a transfer would be made into the general fund, and it was noted to note the negative fund balance and to take measures to, in future years, begin to fully fund claims and decrease the severity of claims that come to the fund. The 2014 beginning fund balance is negative $3.6 million, and the total revenues to the fund from the general fund, transfer, and enterprise funds and other revenues and transfers total $10 million. And then less the liability and claims, then the fund balance that's projected for the end of 2014 is negative $3.5 million. The special revenue funds, Riverfront Development's budget for 2013 included a $1.7 million negative fund balance, and this includes decreased gaming revenues of approximately 3%, and there's a transfer to the general fund that was decreased by 3.5%, civic appropriations at $945,000. It also includes economic development funds for Shreveport Economic Development Authority and also NLEP and MSI, totaling $700,000. This fund also includes transfers to the Convention Center and $300,000 to community development for summer jobs. The overall budget is increased by 6%. And that's mainly due to the increase in the fund balance. The Downtown Entertainment District budget increased by 3%, mainly due to the increase in operating reserves. And it also includes funds to hire a full-time program manager for the district. Grants, police grants and environmental grants are included in this fund, And it also includes recently $200,000 that was added for Cross Bayou Corridor for planning and development. And the Shreveport Redevelopment Agency had a small fund balance at the end of 2012, and estimate reserves for the end of 2014 is $4,100. The MPC's budget's reduced in total by 14%, and this includes the city's operating subsidy of $1 million, and there is an $87,000 remaining within this subsidy to be able to go toward completing the UDC contract. And then also the parish will fund its full share of the UDC contract within 2014. And community development budget is $9.7 million, which includes $887,000 from the general fund for matching funds for grants, and also includes $300,000 for summer jobs. Community development pays back $380,000 to the general fund for indirect costs. The streets special revenue fund, the 2013 year-end estimate fund balance is $2.7 million, mainly due to the transfer of $10 million to capital projects, and adding in the revenues from the SWEPCO franchise fee, and then less $1.5 million transfer for streets maintenance, and then also the appropriation of $3 million for street reconstruction. It's estimated to have an ending fund balance in 2014 of about $4.2 million. For the enterprise funds, golf will resume its operations at Huntington Park, which is mainly due to the increase in the budget of 16%. It receives a general fund subsidy of $87,000. Airports has an increase in their budget of 11%, mainly due to an increase in its operating reserves by about $2.2 million compared to 2013. Its total revenues are up 11%. And water and sewer has budgeted its rate increases for 2014, and the increase in their budget includes those increases in operating reserves of about $6.7 million estimated for the end of 2014. It also will fund an additional 35 positions for the consent decree.
Wait a minute, say that again.
Water and sewer will add about 35 new positions to be able to do work related to the consent decree.
But those are, I'll wait till the end.
Okay. In Sports Tran budget, revenues of $3 million, and it includes the city subsidy of $6.1 million, which is about 6% reduction from 2013. Downtown parking budget increased by 15%, and its revenues are a total about $620,000, and operating reserve estimated at $655,000. The Convention Center operating subsidy, SMG's revenues were just slightly better than 2013, and the transfer will be $1.7 million for 2014. The Convention Center hotel budget is a negative, that's a negative $1.37 million. The total payment, so will go toward debt service, including a contribution to the enterprise fund from the hotel of $352,000, which is significantly less than what was budgeted for 2013. The 2013 contribution was estimated at $1.6 million, and what the Convention Center Hotel estimates that it will actually contribute is about $500,000 for 2013. This in addition to the state hotel sales tax rebate funds of about $900,000. It leaves the hotel enterprise fund with a negative $3.7 million estimated operating reserve for 2014. And this is just within the enterprise fund itself and does not include the reserves of the capital side of the hotel or the hotel management operations. And lastly, in operations budget is the debt service fund, which totals $90 million. And the debt service that will come through this fund totals $28 million for 2014, with a reserve of $61 million. And the increase in the reserve is due mainly to the collection of ad valorem taxes that have not been offset by debt service. The millage for 2014 is 22.05. And a summary of the capital improvements budget, which from 2013 is increased by about 2.8%. And this is mainly due to increases in airport improvements. The capital improvements budget also includes adding projects for a new Fire Station 14 and new Fire Station 17 in lieu of the Superstation 814 project. It also includes the reduction to the minor arterial asphalt program of $4.56 million. And that concludes the overview of the operating and the capital budgets. And this is just what the tentatively is scheduled going forward within the process. And we understand that there will be departmental budget review sessions on the 9th and 16th that the departments will be prepared for.
Questions?
I guess I have a couple, but I'm not trying to get in the weeds, but I'm trying to understand how we get to a few of these numbers. So that's the nature of my question. So if you went to the slide that is summary of available funds, this is where I want to start. Okay. When does the $4.5 million transfer occur in this slide? Does it occur in the estimated fund balance December 31st, 2013, or does it occur in?
As the budget's presented, it occurs in the 2014 estimated revenues as a transfer from the streets fund. So it's included in the $208 million number.
And that's where we go from 203 whatever and change on your one graph to 208 here is that
The transfer.
Okay. Next question, can you go to the public works slide for me? On the public works, we've got about $1.3 million less in revenue from the Bossier tax, right? And so we'll call that a revenue figure. And then we've got a reduction at 4% of what would have been a 4% of 37 is, so about 1.3. So it's pretty much a net even in terms of you give up that revenue, but the expenses are somewhat a wash.
About a net, right.
Okay. And then when it says implementation of bulk collection program, what is that?
That's the non-containerized stuff that we're still picking up. You know, one of the things that Public Work has done pending, you know, the final discussions between the council and the mayor in terms of that
I remember
program.
those meetings.
Yeah, what they've done is actually implementing a program to do it systematically, including some software that will allow people to get appointments and get in the trucks and the trailers that can actually go out and be more responsive to picking those items up. But it would be all the non-containerized stuff that now we're having to kind of make do and get.
And so, just so I'm clear, and not that I'm so worried about typos, but the one bullet is implementation of bulk collection program, and the
And
next
it should
bullet is
be-
reduction. Okay.
Correct.
I wasn't sure if those were somehow related in some total program that I
Yeah.
didn't understand where the notes were associated. Okay.
When we get our budget books, there'll be more of a breakdown about what that implementation
Exactly.
is projected to cost.
Exactly.
Okay. The riverfront now?
Riverfront.
The plus 6%, we have a reduction in gaming revenues estimated at 3%.
The 2013 budget for Riverfront had a negative fund balance of about 1.7 million. So the 2014 budget, including the revenues from 2013, makes up for the negative fund balance and increases it to $930,000. So the increase is mainly due to the fund balance amount.
Okay, can you, sorry about that. Okay, so we got a negative fund balance at the end of 2013, right?
At the end of 2012.
Okay,
So the budget for 2013 includes a negative fund balance of 1.7.
so what is our end of 2013 fund balance in the riverfront fund? Isn't it a negative right now?
For the end of
It's
2013,
projected to be negative.
just very slightly.
I mean, okay. Then, though we have reduction in revenues, how are we getting our reserves higher unless, I guess, we're transferring less?
Correct.
The
The
general fund
reduced
transfer
transfer
and the
to the
civic
general
appropriations.
fund and a slight reduction to civic appropriations, also a slight reduction to the convention center subsidy.
Gotcha. And then, I guess it's a little bit of a misnomer that the budget is greater.
Because it does include the fund balance.
Whereas it was offset by the
Yeah.
negative in the prior year.
Gotcha. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
While y'all
yeah,
do some-
yeah, yeah, I'm
No,
just going
I
through
mean, since
mine.
you want this, I'm just trying to be clear. There are no other transfers that are coming out of the riverfront development other than this? There are no other debts or anything being paid out of the riverfront development other than what's being presented here? I thought at one time there was some notes or something that was being paid out of this.
I don't think there
Well, you
are
maybe,
any notes, debt service
You-
for there was, is what Charles is explaining, but
But those
there's
have been
not any
eliminated
debts
now?
coming out
All
of
that's
it
been-
currently.
I think that was closed at the end of 2011.
Independence Bowl or something.
I can't remember what it was, but there was something that, I remember a capital thing that was closed. Sorry, I'm just looking at another number. I don't have a question on it though.
I'm just a little concerned about the civic appropriations because those are the funds that would generally help a lot of the organizations in the different neighborhoods. 'Cause I know Mike is probably gonna have some organizations coming from his area
It hurts.
looking for a 10 or 15 or $20,000 grant. And I'll probably have something too, Mike. I just
I thought it was 250.
I just hope that, and I'm saying this to the administration and to the council, I just hope that we would kind of toe the line and just kind of say, I'm just kind of make sure that we're fair to all of the organizations across board. Because, Mr. CEO, if we don't, that's where the politics of this come into play. And we don't want to get our hands too open out there playing politics. So I'm hoping that, and I'm kind of saying this to Jeff too, because I think Jeff chairs that committee. I kind of hope, Jeff, that we would look at the civic appropriation from strictly kind of an analytical standpoint.
Yeah,
Because if we don't, we're gonna start getting ourselves in some hot water. Because we used to have quite a bit of money. A few years back, we had quite a bit of money in the civic appropriations, and we could take care of a lot of community-based organizations. So, I hope Mr. CEO, we don't, because I guess it's more on us than it is really on you all. But I would hope.
Exactly.
And Jeff, since you chairing, and I think I'm on that committee, and I think what Rose
Rose is on there.
right. We got to make sure that we toe the line
gonna
on
be-
that, because if we don't, we're gonna get in a little trouble.
You're right, Councilman Shine. It is always a tough decision. It will be a particularly tough decision this year, and that there are even less funds in there. So one thing to keep in mind, when we have, right now we're looking at this civic appropriations budget of 935,000, and then, we're required by state to 200,000 of that goes to one organization. So we're really looking at a discretionary amount of less than $750,000, which this year I believe our requests for civic appropriations totaled 1.7 million. So that's $1 million worth of requests that are not getting funded, and people, no matter what. And so we need for people to understand that while that money is always hard to come by, it is much harder now than it used to be. So you're absolutely
And
right.
that's what I'm saying, we got to make sure that we look at those criteria. Did we look at, I know one time we had said we would look at maybe the possibility of this $200,000 that was just mentioned, to see, because of the economy, and we might be able to cut back on some of that. Did we, because I think that was put into the, into legislation, back during,
Senator Tarver.
yeah, as Oliver's good friend, Senator Tarver's days, to see if, because the economy has changed since then. And did we look into,
Yes, sir, but right now, we're still obligated to give it.
Right.
And unless and until, it's changed in Baton Rouge, we're obligated to give it to that organization.
But, of course, I'd hate for us to look too hard because they may give us less for it. And then, it's pretty much net for us. We get what they give us and then we push it out through here.
right.
So, if we can convince them that it only needs less money, they may convince us that they only need to give us less money.
Well, we might need to tell them too that, hey, we got more people eating out the pot than what we had, than what was eating out the pot during that time. During that time, if wasn't that many people eating out of the same pot, then we was getting more money from other places. Do that, and even with the riverboats, I mean, and that's basically where that money comes from. It comes from the riverboat. I mean, they don't have the same kind of funds,
Right.
that they had. So, it just might be something for us to look at. I mean, I'm just look at,
Have to
get
our lobbyists on that
Oliver,
next
this is the only thing that I'm conservative about when it comes to money, because I never had any.
And I think the other thing about the civic appropriation line is we've talked about it the last couple of years. And as we continue to see budgets get tighter, at some point, we have to begin to have that discussion
Right.
about what's our responsibility to be funding. If there are programs that are duplications out there or that are solely getting by on our fundings, we got to have some hard discussions and hard decisions. And, we've moved that way, but backed off. And it's getting tougher every year. And I think that we're going to really have to take a serious look at that.
Yeah, I think we, I know we passed a sort of a more rigorous application process. I don't know that that's been implemented, but we did pass it.
A lot of work went into that.
We hope to
Yeah.
implement that this coming year.
I hope so
I
too.
mean, we're gonna have to.
Councilman Albertine, did you have any more?
I do. I have 3 more slides I want to look at.
Okay.
It must be on your street special revenue slide or special revenue fund. Okay. The 1,500, the 1.5 million, obviously, we did that on an annual basis to the general fund for maintenance. The 3 million appropriation for street reconstruction. Not, either I'm forgetting or what is that from?
It was included within improvements and equipments within the budget, and that amount was maintained, but I don't believe anything has been spent out of it this year.
Negative operating reserve,
Where,
which is
okay,
the available for expenditures.
so, okay, you mean we transferred, or,
We'd have had to transfer
I-
3 million.
I'm not sure, I guess I'd like us to look at that, because I'm having a little, I mean, I'm not saying I couldn't be mistaken, but when it says there's a $3 million appropriation for street reconstruction, I have a feeling we're mixing a capital project in here with this, but maybe I'm mistaken on that.
And it could be, Sharika, if I'm not mistaken, this is just a continuation of what was done.
For
This year,
2013.
That's the
And
3 million that we,
It's appropriated within improvements and equipments for 2013, and it was left the same way for the
Right, we simply
2014
budgeted the
budget.
same way. Obviously, you guys can move that around.
What did
for
we
budget purposes.
appropriate the 3 million for in 2013?
remember we took it out of reserves.
I'm not sure what it was
put there,
for.
And then came back and moved it back out.
Not concrete.
We put it in
That
during the
concrete
budget
overlay?
process and then came back and took it back out.
Otherwise, it would become a part of the fund balance.
Yeah, and I guess I'd like to nail that down, because we didn't, I remember, okay, Mike's got a good point. At the beginning of the year, when we went through the budget last year, we went through this discussion about taking reserves and putting more reserves in the special revenue. And then, I don't know if we ever really did it or not, because there was some discussion about that's too risky because our reserve number isn't high enough. And so, I think that was, I think I was maybe the proposer of that particular piece of legislation, was instead of having whatever our reserve number was, to take some of that, reduce that reserve and put more in the streets. Then I think either, whether that amendment passed or not, I have a feeling that that was transferred back out at some point.
I think it was.
But that, do you remember this whole discussion?
I don't remember.
You know, in your earlier years, you would have, but I could see
If that's
that.
the case, though, you'd simply have 3 million more on the balance.
Which might negate the requirement for this other 4.6.
Because really, yeah, from our perspective, wherever it comes from, it really doesn't matter whether it's from here or from the other. We just identified the one that was most easily to identify, but it really doesn't matter.
I think with that one just needs a little trail on where that started from and where it ended up over the course of the year.
We'll track that.
3 million went back to reserve.
Well,
It
I
did.
believe,
I
it
think
did,
it did.
it did. I mean, I think it did, and what I'm
We had a
saying is
big
the way this
discussion on
thing's,
that. We had a big discussion on that.
We'll track it.
and what I think is we made, the whole little issue on that 4650 may be mitigated significantly by this 3 million, but I don't want to raise everybody's hopes here, I just have that as a note.
And we'll check it too, Mr. James.
Okay. Can we roll to water and sewer question here? Obviously, we know the rate increases. The 35 additional positions, now are those contracted or are those employees? And the only reason I say that, on my retirement system thing, I worry a little bit about that, particularly when it's for a fixed period of time. But maybe it's contractual services and it's the way it's written.
These are permanent positions. These are for operation and maintenance positions. These are for the folks that go out and maintain our system. One of the reasons that we're in this position that we're in right now is because we don't have the people to maintain our system. It's not going to do us a lot of good to spend $350 million on our sewer system and then not put the personnel in place to maintain that system. This is significantly less than we've had folks come in and do evaluations of how many people we should have based on the miles of pipeline, the size of our plants, and this is less than half of what they recommend we should have. We've evaluated our organization. We've looked at what we needed. These are specifically for crews to TV our sewer mains, which we will have to do forever. We will have to TV, 10, 15%, clean our system every so many years. We can't do that with the crews that we have. So these are permanent positions.
It's not less expensive to contract it out? Is it less expensive to contract something
It
like
is,
that
it's
out?
very expensive to contract
It
those
costs more to
services
contract
out.
it out?
It costs more to contract it out. When you look at what we pay our folks, in the field, it's not a whole lot. Most of our folks are making $20,000 to $25,000 a year, maybe a little bit more. The equipment that goes with it, contractors and other folks are making more than that. We're trying to, again, we are putting a tremendous amount of money into our infrastructure in capital to fix our systems. And if we don't come back with the people that we need to continue to maintain that system, we're going to be right back where we started, and I don't want to be there. Our department, over 10 years ago, had over 400 people in our department. It was cut to the point where we're now under 300 people. We need those folks to maintain. I don't have a crew to go out and actually mow right-of-ways so I can maintain those big right-of-ways for those big interceptor sewer systems that we can't even get to because it's a forest right now, because it hasn't been maintained in years. We're going to have to, as part of the consent decree, we are required to, when we have an overflow, and you guys have seen the reports, you see how many overflows we have. When we have an overflow, we are required by the consent decree to video that sewer main within 24 hours. We have one TV truck right now and one TV crew. When you have a rain event and you've got 10, maybe 15 overflows, we can't get to that with one TV truck. We can't even do the maintenance we need with that one TV truck. So this includes 2 more TV crews. And a TV crew is not just a truck with a guy on it. It's 2 people, in addition to the wash truck that goes with it, because you're out there because you have to wash the mains, and a vac truck to remove those solids from those lines. And there's people that go with those trucks, having 2 more crews.
And I'm certainly not suggesting, I just have to say that there aren't, based on reading of governmental agencies today, you rarely see the cost benefit long-term on a municipality or government agency where they're encouraging adding more full-time personnel. Now, I'm not saying this isn't, I'm just saying that when we look at where we face on our retirement system and the burden of those people, that it's surprising to me, and I obviously haven't done any of the numbers on this, that this is really in the best long-term interest of the city. But I don't know that.
Well, these would be then permanently contracted folks, because this is what we feel we need, and this isn't even 50% of what we've been told by consultants that you really should have based on other municipalities. We've been shorthanded for years and years and years, and that's why we're having the problems we're having right now. I'm more than happy to answer whatever questions.
I'm just saying, my other concern would be, we are funding a program. My understanding, we are funding a program with these increases for about 12 years. And what are we going to do with these 35 positions after those?
They're going to maintain those facilities. They're going to TV and clean the lines like we're supposed. Yeah, they're going to maintain. These are maintenance folks. These are folks that are on TV trucks, wash trucks. These are folks out at our treatment plants. I think we have 120, 130, almost 130 lift stations. Right now, I've got a crew of less than 15 that maintains that 120 lift stations. We can't do it.
Let me just.
I know where you're going, Councilman, and I can talk to you a little bit about that. I know what you're asking.
At the end of the 12 years.
Right. Where's the money to pay for these additional
I understand
folks?
that the rates, there's going to be some consideration sending those rates back down.
They won't ever go down. Right.
Well,
The stamina won't be
you
here.
won't need as much money at that time,
But they're not gonna ever go
but
down.
you're still going to need some for the O&M that's built into that process, because you got to keep the O&M going. So even though they're reduced to take out that bulk of 350 million or whatever, It doesn't mean you gotta reduce it all the way down to zero and have no money coming.
But now, Dale, to be truthful with you, as long as I've been around, I've never seen
Public safety.
taxes go up, rates go up, and then come back down. And to be truthful with you, because we won't be around, but the water bills are not gonna ever go down no more.
That's what he says.
I mean, I know we sit here and say that. We
Right.
sit here and say that in 12 years, you know, well, we're gonna readjust your water rates again. But I've been around long enough it's very seldom. You know, they start saying that with gas. You know, gas is, you know, we're gonna run this gas up, and when we get another supply and we start drilling more, they're gonna go down. It might go down 6 cents, 7 cents, 8 cents. But Dale, to be true with ourselves, I mean, the water rate, and because I can understand what you're saying. You need those people so we won't get back in the same fix that we were in before. So I mean, to be true with you, I can understand that, and I see what you're saying. We do need them, because if we don't, instead of water rates going down, they're gonna go back up again. I mean, we're going to move it up again, because everything is going to increase in cost. And so I can understand what you're saying, and I would hope that we would leave something in place where 15 years from now, 20 years from now, we wouldn't have to look at spending another $350 million. At that time, it's going to be $600 million. And to be truthful with you, I know we're getting a few jobs in here, Dale, but I don't see the economy here in Shreveport growing that much. You know, it has not grown that much since I've been down here. I've been down here right at 30 years. And our economy of this city has not really grown. If there's anything, we don't have the money that's coming in now that we did back then. So, I mean, I can understand what you're saying. And Mr. Chairman, I think we're going to have to look at that, because if we don't, we're going to be in the same position again.
And what we can do is break down in terms of what's the actual cost for those positions. So as a part of your evaluation, you know exactly what those 35 positions will cost, so you can factor that in.
And I think the thing that, you know, certainly first-time council has seen anything related to the budget, and in all of our discussions about consent decree and water rates, we never specifically talked about additional positions. What I'd ask Barbara is, when we get to our departmental budget meeting, if you would be prepared to talk about the pros and cons of 35 additional people in this year's budget versus maybe 50% of those this year, 50% next year, and the impact that it would have on your department, in case we need to look at some alternatives.
And I'll get you the cost of those. The cost of those employees is not, it sounds like a lot of folks. Again, most of these are MS1s, MS2s, maybe MS3s, very few management. And what I consider management is still fairly low paid compared to the private industry. It's not a significant increase with regards to the budget. When we went through these rate increases, we had talked originally about the rates including a 25% increase in our O&M budget. We reduced that when we did the last set of proposals for rate increases down to a 15% increase. I think this plus the equipment and everything else we've asked for is close to an 8% of our O&M budget, and even though we've asked for 15%, and that's what's built into the rates.
Thank you, Barbara.
Last one for me, debt service. That, assuming tranche 2 is the rest of the GO bonds, what is that a year approximately cost us? I mean, obviously, some of the rates are a little different or whatever. Is that 30 million bucks? What is that?
I'm not sure. I think the first tranche was about 6 million a year. So the second set of 93 million compared to 81 for the first set maybe just a little bit more than the 6 million per year. I'm not sure exactly how much the debt service would be on the second sale.
Is Charles in here? Does he have, I mean, a rough estimate? The only reason I ask is, I understand the intent of having a $61 million reserve number in there. Obviously, you want to make sure, you had enough coverage for at least one more year's worth of revenue to pay off both what's currently on the books plus the additional, and obviously we know some's going to come off the books, hopefully in 2014. I don't know exactly about the restructuring of Convention Center and the rest, but maybe we're still over milled.
When we reset the mills last year, it was done with the assumption that the second one would be done, and we were figuring about $7.5 million for that debt service. So we are actually collecting that money, even though
Understood. I mean,
we assumed we would start paying it this year, and obviously we aren't. So that was worked into that calculation, which is why it is going up versus staying level, because we had figured we'd have that debt service there now.
yeah, and I guess, and ultimately, there's a lot of things on looking back at, reducing that millage. And I do agree that we should wait till we actually sell those bonds and know what our rates are and be able to project it before we do it. But it's certainly something that, looking at those numbers, even if you're putting another 7 or 8 million on it, somebody could certainly argue that we're slightly over milled at this point.
I mean, based on what we were looking at, we have one debt service or one GOB that pays off in 16, and then it stays level until 19. But we would figure we would be able to reduce it again in 2 years, and then look at it again 4 more years after that. And after 19, it will be significantly reduced based on our current debt.
What would it be a councilman in 19? Just kidding. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
If those councilmen leading up till then have maintained
Yeah.
the city in such
Yeah.
a condition that it is not in dire need of additional debt service.
There's a lot of ifs along the way there.
It's gonna be in need. You don't have to worry about that. Like I said, I've been here a long time, and every year they say, well, we're gonna pay it off, and we're gonna have every 3 or 4 years you're gonna have more needs coming on. Because actually, when we look at our street program, I mean, Dale, what we doing now, 21 million, even 40 million. I mean, even to fix the streets like we really need, and Mr. Harris will tell you, we probably need $250 million to start making a difference in our streets. And this is something that we're going to have to continue to do from now on. I keep on calling Sam. I'm not going to call you no more. I guess I'll call Art. Art might be running from there. But Art, I mean,
We have to remind him, he forgets everything.
I support that.
I'm gonna be quiet. I'm not gonna say all that. But actually, I mean, and Dale, you understand? I mean, our needs are gonna continue to increase. And Jeff, I know you chairman of the infrastructure committee, but and Mr. Harris will tell you from working many years in Kansas City. I mean, it never goes down. It always go right. It always go up. As long as I've been here, all of it has never gone down. It has always gone up, and that's kind of one of the reasons why our streets, our infrastructure is kind of in the shape that it's in, because we have not really spent the money that we need to spend for our infrastructure. So it's gonna, the expense is gonna continue to go up. I know, and I ought to tell you, Mike, I thought maybe the less hair he had on his head, he started getting bald headed, the barber wasn't gonna charge him as much. But he goes back, he didn't have as much hair to cut, but you had to pay what, the same price, and the barber's going up on it. So, I mean, our prices, and I mean, you know, our expenses are not going down. And look, I'm through.
Ms. Fields, would you go back to that summary slide that had all the ending balances for a couple of years on it? And I know we need to move on to other things on our agenda as well, but, you know, anytime you build a budget, you build a budget as big as what we have and as many variables, there's that house of cards structure to it. And I think the thing that continues to worry me is that December 31st, 2013 estimated fund balance. Although $4,048,000 is not a ton of money, we have no assurances really that that's where we're going to be. We've seen a good revenue report this past month. We know what's happening with riverboat funds. And, if that number gets cut in half, then it kind of changes the whole playing field. And unfortunately, it's evidently very hard to track that number on a month-to-month basis. But I just think as we move forward in our discussions, that's something I want us to keep in mind is, you know, how do we pinpoint that number as close as we can? Because we're really basing a lot off of that number moving forward. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Thompson.
In the retained risk fund, it appears that we are appropriating in liability reserves a minus $3,785,500. And on this end, we don't think we've ever seen that before. And we need to have some discussions about that. And I bring it up now because of the house of cards thing that you're talking about.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Fields.
Okay. Is that it? Thank you.
All right, I believe that brings us to reports. Does any council member have any questions? Or Dale, I'm sorry, were you finished with city business?
Oh, yes, sir.
So long ago you
I feel like we've been on it for a while. Does any council member have any questions or concerns relative to property standards?